Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to be dealing with a topic that affects a whole lot of us out there, and I guarantee it's going to resonate with a lot of you out there. And this is in reference to an article out of CBC News pertaining to jobs, wages, and the labor force participation rate, and how that breaks down demographically, who it affects, who it's hurting, and what central planning and this constant manipulation of the social and economic lives of millions of people, how detrimental and how devastating that is for certain people in certain sectors of the economy. Headline out of CBC News: business analysis, lots of work but fewer want it as participation rate shrinks. Don Pittis. Friday's job numbers are expected to show a smaller proportion of Canadians in the labor force. This being reported February 7th, 2019. Unless there's a miracle medical breakthrough, the millennial generation will soon be able to stop worrying about the baby boomers plugging up the job market and living in the nicest homes. According to The Economist magazine, peak death for boomers will strike in about 2034. It will be very sad, said The Economist in its cheeky style. But for house hunters, it will be a help. While U.S. statistics show older people increasingly hanging on to houses as they age, the boomer effect on the job market will come much sooner and is already impacting North American employment. Keep in mind the push for mass immigration to this country as I read through this article. Exit boomers. Friday's job numbers for the month of January will provide the latest update, but data from Statistics Canada already shows that the gradual exit of those boomers from the labor force over the last 10 years is having an impact on the economy that has never been seen before. While this long goodbye has been predicted and feared for decades by demographers, there are some things about the numbers that were not foreseen and are harder to explain, said Etienne Leil, who teaches labor economics at the University de Quebec à Montréal. Both in the U.S. and in Canada, the labor force participation rate has been falling over the past 10 years, but the underlying reasons are quite different, said Lal, a specialist on how labor markets change over time. And then, as you can see in this chart for Canada's shrinking labor force, yes, it's definitely shrinking, and that is because there's a lot of the boomer cohorts that are leaving the workforce. Of course, the bulk of them, right, this is the thing, this is a huge disparity and difference, folks, is the ones that work in the public sector who get to retire at 55, you know, Freedom 55, the ones that have like a gold-plated pension and have basically a secure job working for the government that has multiple layers of protection, so that they're basically like they got a job for life, right? Contrast that with those in the private sector who you'll see are the ones that are prolonging, those from the boomer demographic. And I notice this even in my own personal subjective experiences or anecdotal experiences. Yes, the boomer cohorts that are in the private sector that don't have the big government social safety net, right? They can't use forced income and wealth redistribution to prop up or supplement their incomes in their later years. Those are the ones that are still participating in the labor force rate. Government workers, yeah, like I say, they're leaving in droves and going off to retire in their gated communities with that nice gold-plated pension. So there's already a discrepancy and a big divide among the boomers in terms of the public and private sector. But even those in the private sector are going to retire eventually. They're going to have to. A lot of them just by health reasons. Some of them maybe don't want to, or maybe really can't afford to. Health alone and the fact that you're getting on your years is going to force you to either seek a position where you're actually not truly being as productive as you once were, which is going to greatly affect your salary or your income, or you're going to have to find some other way to try to survive and get by in that last or final stage of your life. It's not going to be easy. While Britain, the U.S., and Canada all experienced a baby boom as soldiers came back from the Second World War and started families, the size of the demographic bulge is subtly different in these three countries. For instance, peak death for Canada may come a bit later than for the UK, as mentioned in The Economist. Canadians generally live longer. Also in Canada, the adoption of the birth control pill 5 years after the U.S. means the boom here lasted longer. According to the way Statistics Canada makes its calculations, the notion of participation is based on the number of people available for work out of the total population, 15 years old and above. So when you see that labor force participation rate, even like I say, even when it's on the upper high 60s, right, 68%, let's say, that still means a full 32%, basically a third of the adult population, those 50 and older who are old enough or eligible to work, aren't actively participating in the economy. So think about it. A third of the population, folks, are relying on, whether it's their parents or some other form of wealth or income redistribution, usually big government initiatives and policies. But yeah, that tells you that why do we need this mass influx of immigrants to fill these roles or these positions? In reality, you don't. You just need to get a substantial portion, or at least a decent proportion of these 35% or 30+% Canadians that aren't doing anything, aren't actively participating in the workforce. No mass immigration needed. Work till you drop. During the decades that Canadian statisticians had been collecting the data, the participation rate has varied in a relatively narrow range between about 62 and 68%, usually dependent on the economic cycle. Recession and rising unemployment meant falling participation. Things like disability or extreme age, extreme wealth, or even laziness have always kept a certain percentage of the population out of the workforce. As feminist economists have complained, also excluded were people, usually women, who did unpaid work such as looking after the young and old. Okay, there's no such thing as unpaid work. I mean, if you were a mother, even back, like in the 50s or 60s, that stayed home and raised your children, no, you weren't unpaid because everything was afforded to you by your husband that actually provided for all the economic prosperity or income that came into the home. So, it's not like these women didn't have any means at their disposal. I mean, and you well know this, folks. I mean, a lot of times actually the guy goes out to work and hands over the paycheck to the wife, and she helps, deal with like paying the bills or going to the store or, grabbing the kids their school supplies. Or getting herself like some new clothes or a new dress it's not that women were actually unpaid. They weren't employed by an employer per se, but, women were not slaves, all right? They were rewarded and compensated for their activities. This is such a failure on so many levels when they put forth this kind of gender divide type of narrative. There are examples of people who work until they drop, but that is unusual. So as the baby boom bulge works through the population like a hamster swallowed by a snake, it is completely reasonable for the labor participation rate to sink. The surprising thing, said Lau, is that the decline in participation by workers 55 and over is not happening nearly as fast as statisticians had expected. Once again, like I say, the 55, the glaring divide. If you broke down these numbers, you would see, well, no, actually the ones that work for government that are 55 and older, because I know that, like I said, once again, my own personal experience, the members of my family or the extended members of my family or other people that I know who work for government, yeah, they took their freedom 55. They're long retired, right, of the boomer cohort. It's the ones in the private sector that are having to put off or prolong the retirement. Better educated, healthier, and in demand due to a skill shortage, in the last 20 years, participation by the oldest groups has risen from 25% to 40%. Now, a lot of that could be attributed to the economic downfall, folks. A lot of the people that didn't get to retire that might have been able to retire if it wasn't for, central planning and the economic malfeasance that happened as a consequence of having so much central planning in regards to our economy. Yes, a lot of these people would have been able to retire, but because of central planners and the manipulation of not just our currency, but the purchasing power through the devaluation of it and the debt enslavement, unfunded liabilities, constant taxation, plundering the people's income to the tune of now over half for the average Canadian. Those are all contributing factors why a lot of people can't retire. So if only part of the decline can be described by aging, where have all the other workers gone? In Canada, one has to look at the other end of the age spectrum. The missing 0.4% have disappeared from the group under age 25. Among those who are non-students, the labor participation rate has been flat over the past 10 years, said Lau. So what is going on is decreasing labor participation by students. Well, I mean, that's another easily explainable thing. These young people that are coming out with, massive amounts of debts, or even those that maybe don't have debts, but they look out there and they see that the jobs that they have afforded or positions that are out there that are available to them are service sector, Would you like fries with that? Low paying retail jobs, a lot of minimum wage income, a lot of part-time jobs. But yes, of course, the people out there today, especially the younger people, when they look at the price of things, they're like, I'm not working at these cheap rates. And if they've talked to people like myself, right, where you can point out where 20 years ago, I was making in like dollar per hour ranges compared to the typical fields I worked in today. They're only paying a few dollars more. Meanwhile, 20 years have passed. The price of things, some of them have tripled. So if you've only gained a very, very tiny increase as far as your wages, meanwhile, everything else, as far as the price you pay for everything that you consume, has doubled or tripled, yeah, that's a disincentive for a lot of people to work. And I completely understand that. Like I say, humans function under incentive, folks. For Canada, that's like money in the bank for the economy because they will eventually come out with high-level skills. The story south of the border is much worse. First of all, not true, Don, not true. A lot of these kids that are going to school, you know, these students, and employers are noticing this time and time again, more and more every day, that, yeah, these students with these academic credentials are coming out indoctrinated, dumbed down, and yeah, that paper isn't even worth the money that they're paying for it. Male deaths of despair. The thing that is very different between the two countries is changes in labor force participation among prime age workers, said Lau, referring to the 25 to 54 age group. In Canada, this has remained roughly constant over the past 10 to 20 years. In the U.S., the decline in jobs for prime age men in particular has been well documented, and it has been associated with ill health and deaths of despair. Once again, actually, that's very much the same thing here in Canada, folks. You know, whether you're talking like the oil patch or a lot of the manufacturing industries in Quebec and Ontario. So the oil patch in Alberta, or like I say, the manufacturing industries in central Canada, Ontario and Quebec, yes, those have been hollowed out just like, you know, the Midwest of the U.S. The story is pretty similar here in Canada too, folks. No, it's not that much difference. Not as Don is trying to suggest anyways. According to David McDonald, senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, one reason may be the much higher levels of education among younger Canadian prime age workers. Certainly education levels for the most recent generations are extraordinarily high, the highest in the world, he said. There have also been many more well-paid jobs in the resource sector as a percentage of the Canadian population. Okay, are you talking about prior to 2014, the resource sector? Really, though? You're not paying attention to the actual fundamentals of the resource sectors today, Don? Like, this is 2019. This ain't prior to the collapse of the oil industry, or the fact that mining, like, or the fact that environmentalists keep trying to shut out or quell any chance of creating any genuine productivity in terms of resource extraction in this country. Another difference, said McDonald, may be the low minimum wage in many parts of the U.S. that failed to convince the long-term unemployed to look for work or to keep working once employed. Yeah, because minimum wage is the end-all be-all, is it, Don? Like, come on, man. Seriously, though? That means you're literally at the bottom of the pile, dude. Like, those people, doesn't matter. Like I say, in Canada, yes, our minimum wage is higher, but geez, don't you think our prices are actually much higher too in reflection in comparison to the U.S.? If you're making $10 an hour in the U.S., your purchasing power is just as good or just as high as making $14 or $15 in the Canadian economy. Okay, just pay it. I mean, just gas prices alone, or the prices we pay for food or internet. Or, I mean, come on, Don. Like, really though? Tammy Sherrill, director of the Center for Economic Research and Policy Analysis at Wilfrid Laurier University, said Canada may yet face some of the same problems as the U.S. Yeah, no, actually, see, this is the thing. Let me help explain things once again, because Don doesn't seem to know how to do it. So that's what I'm here for, folks, trying to help you. The U.S. went through their protraction, their retraction, right? That was that crash in 2008 allowed for a lot of those bad actors and those bad economic decisions to be weeded out and the malinvestments to be worked through so that the American people could once again at least have some basis to stand upon for economic growth going forward. So you have to go through the hard times, right? If you want to do things better or be more productive in the future. What has happened in Canada is basically because of Harper and the bailouts and the fact that they tried to keep everything on the up and up, or at least on the hush-hush, when you're talking about the fact that there was going to be a severe and major economic recession, or ultimately a depression in this country as well. But the only difference is they pumped up and stimulated the economy to the point where they painted completely over it. So what you're seeing out there today is the media, rather than like the U.S. media, which actually, even though they do put a lot of bullshit stories out there, they at least admit that, you know, the economy went up and down. Canada, the central planners, the central bankers, the media mouthpiece, and the political or ruling class in this country kept trying to pretend that Canada's okay. We're some exception to the rule, that everyone else in the world, they're going through hard economic times, but Canada, no, everything's great. Sunny ways, blue skies. it's raining roses, right? No, it's just what it is they just, like I say, the Trudeau Liberals or the Harper Conservatives before them have stimulated the Canadian economy on the backs of the unborn to prop up the establishment or the status quo as a means to not have to deal with reality. But that reality is something that they're going to have to deal with at some point in time. She said prime-age male participation rates have been flat. She worries workers with lower education, such as those recently pushed out of the oil industry, may follow the trends seen in the U.S. The saving grace for keeping employment strong in Canada's core age group and among aging boomers, women, she said. Oh, well, there you go. When all the boomers, that just can't, do all those oil field services jobs, right, out there welding in minus 30 or 40 degree weathers, or doing all those real hard physical labor construction jobs. Well, don't worry. Apparently women will take up and assume those roles and those positions. So don't worry, Canada. Everything's going to be okay because women, right? I mean, the kind of stuff that these media personalities, the way they go on is like as if they suggest today that, now I guess men are just nothings or nobodies, and they're once again going to need these super women to come and take care of us and save us from ourselves. Holy crap. Wow, right? What you see as a general trend is that women's participation rate had a very steep incline, said Sherrill, studying a graph beginning in the 1970s. They continued to increase from the 90s until now, she said. They have been rising steadily. Yeah, look at the statistics once again. You'll see that most of the women are in the fields that are government-paid public sector employment, right? So in other words, not actually the ones that are building everything, not the things that you actually need, right? Because think about it. You could actually eliminate a lot of these government bureaucratic positions, and it wouldn't affect you at all. Matter of fact, you wouldn't even notice the difference. Yeah, but welders, construction workers, like in all the trades, electricians, plumbers, all the people that actually build the world around you, and engineers, all these people, right? As if public sector jobs, right, are going to somehow supplement or make up for the loss of all this real tangible work that actually has built the entire world that you look around and that protects you from the harsh elements that exist in the state of nature. Once again, folks, Don Pittis, yeah, I'm sure if you ask him, he probably identifies as a feminist. So, of course, this is the kind of article that he would put out. But, hey, there's some information contained within there that at least I think is important enough. That's why I covered this particular article for this video. But, yeah, there's a huge breakdown in society, folks. And it's all going to come to head at some point in time. Closing your eyes and plugging your ears ain't going to make it go away. You're going to have to confront it at some point in time. The U.S. already confronted theirs. UK, they're confronting their own mess over there. Canada, once again, our political leaders, our thought leaders, are still trying to pump up and praise central planning and suggest that everything's okay. Sunny ways indeed. And actually, before I tie this video up, I just want to read a few of the top comments on this article from CBC News. So I'm actually on the CBC News website. So you got to remember, what I like to see is, because the people that actually contribute their comments on the CBC website, you do have a lot of leftists, a lot of people that would be more aligned with CBC. And you see that a lot when you pay attention to the comment section. There's some conservatives or people that try to counter the narratives, but a lot of the time it's just mostly an echo chamber, right? But actually, for this particular article, what I found quite striking was the fact that most commenters here are actually pointing out what I'm trying to suggest in their own way. So this is, and I go through, when you go to the CBC website, you have the choice of newest, oldest, most liked, editor's pick, most active, and most replies. So I always use most liked because I like to see, that kind of gives the pulse or the pretense of what's popular, what's trending, what's really resonating with people on the website. And like I say, the most liked comment, the first one is by a Jane Miller. There's no such thing as a labor shortage. Only a shortage of people willing to work at what they are willing to pay. Raise wages and there will be no shortage of people willing to do the job. Labor is like any other commodity. You can either pay market value or do without. 123 thumbs up, 10 thumbs down. So yeah, people were obviously agreeing with that comment because they were saying, yeah, that's resonating with me. Going down to the next one. This by Mark Junkman George. There is no shortage of workers. Believing otherwise is just buying into a sales job being done to us to promote immigration. What there is a shortage of is good paying full-time work with benefits. Employment or a career worth having that pays a living wage, allowing you to consider having a family and participating in society. Exactly. And you know that's definitely going to resonate with a lot of Canadians. Next one. This one's by Craig McNeil. The wages are so low, many don't want to work for it. Our economy has been slowly increasing part-time minimum wage jobs for the last 15 years. In 1987, I worked as maintenance at an arena job, paid $13.50 an hour. Today, that same job pays $12 an hour. So once again, this is someone, and I can, like I say, I can completely align with this. This is from 87, but I remember a job I had working in a lumberyard in 1990 or 91, around those very early 90s anyways. I was up around like the $13+ range myself, and today, if you went to look at work in those places, it might be $1 or $2 more, but think about it, the price of everything has tripled, and rents and housing costs. I mean, think about how much of the divide and differences these days compared to even just 20, 30 years ago. So of course, just as this person suggests, just like so far all the commenters are suggesting, there's no shortage of labor in Canada. There's a shortage of good paying jobs. And the people recognize that, and they're doing what they can to avoid having to become basically wage slaves, subjects, or serfs. Totally understandable. Once again, it all comes down to incentive, folks. Next comment, Leighton Bennett. Others have said it, and I agree. If you want a higher participation rate, you have to pay a wage that will give someone a chance to pay their bills. Next one, George Subbotts. Better educated, healthier, and in demand due to skills shortages. In the last 20 years, participation by the oldest group has risen from 25 to 40%. So they were quoting, he was quoting a segment from the article, and then his response was, it's not that, it's because they can't afford to retire. Another one, George Wilson. The problem won't be in finding work, it will be in finding work that pays living wages. Next one, Harvey Dent. Everyone has their price. Offer a fair rate, and I'll listen. Don't hand out scraps and expect people to make a meal of it. Next one, Mark Jones. Try paying a decent wage. I pay nearly triple the industry average, and I have no problem recruiting and retaining qualified workers. My competition pays their employees just about minimum wage, and that is why I get the cream of the crop to come work for me. So, right? Exactly. Next, Brian T. Johnson. You have to have good jobs for people to want to work. The pay is less than it used to be, and the attitude of employers is mostly worse. Anyways, that's enough of those. But yeah, as you see, every comment, all the most popular comment on CBC's very own website are basically pointing out to Don Pittis. Like, that's the thing, CBC. Don, hey, just pay attention to your commenters. They're all telling you the reason why this is going on. You don't have to speculate anymore. The actual people that you're trying to talk down to, they're telling you the reasons for this, right? So just listen to the people instead of sitting around with a bunch of elitists or bureaucrats or public sector workers and trying to figure this stuff out. Listen to the people. They're telling you the reasons. They're giving you an explanation. You just have to listen. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.